Welcome back for hopefully the last part 4 and the last one for chapter 4. Okay, so we're going to go through the aquatic biomes, the water biomes. We're going to do freshwater and then we'll do marine and then we're done. So freshwater, different factors that are important to freshwater. These are abiotic factors. How much dissolved oxygen is in the water affects whether fish can survive there or not. Turbidity. Turbidity is how much stuff is dissolved in the water, how dark the water is, how far can you see in the water is turbidity, usually marked as a depth. If the water is very mucky, you can't see very far, that's high turbidity, and it will be marked by a very short depth. If the water is crystal clear and you can see forever, that's low turbidity. And turbidity affects how much light gets down there, so it's going to affect photosynthesis of organisms. How much nitrogen and phosphorus there is in the water, of course, those are needed for growth. Phosphorus is usually the number one limiting factor in aquatic situations, nitrogen 2. That is flipped from terrestrial habitats. The pH of the water, the temperature of the water, and then the flow of the water. How fast is it flowing? What's the flow rate? Okay, also we have the depth, how deep is the water, the light intensity occurring, that's going to affect photosynthesis. Then we have biotic components, the biodiversity, how many critters are in it, kind of thing, and we'll talk more about biodiversity in the next unit. Primary productivity, how much photosynthesis is going on, and then macroinvertebrates. We're going to do this when we go on our field trip. Certain macroinvertebrates tell you if water is polluted and that kind of thing, so those are important. Okay, so basically when it comes to aquatic freshwater systems, we have streams and rivers, and they're designated, they're flowing fresh water, they're designated because they're moving. They're usually fed by snow or rain in what is referred to as the watershed. All that area is, the rain in that area is going to shed or go into the local rivers. It relies on inputs from the rain and stuff. And it relies on inputs, of biological matter from terrestrial environments, leaves falling in, that kind of thing, because you have fast-moving water, plants can't grow in it. Flow equals oxygen, which equals fish species. When water moves, it actually allows oxygen to dissolve into the water, so the more movement you have, the more oxygen you have in the water. Sorry, I can't stop yawning. And that will increase the number of fish species you have. In lakes and ponds, we have different zones. I'll go through those in a minute. You need to know those. There's the littoral, which is the edge where you're going to find things. Limnetic is basically, limnology is the study of a lake. So the limnetic zone is basically your open water, sunlit water in your lake. That's where you're going to find your plankton and your algae and stuff. And then profundal zone is the no water, no light zone at the bottom of your pond, if your pond is that deep to have a profundal zone. And then benthic is the bottom. It doesn't matter whether it's in 2 inches of water or 600 feet of water, the bottom is the bottom. And that's benthic. Okay, so if you look at this diagram over here, you need to be familiar with these. So again, the littoral is the edge where little plants and stuff can grow. Once it gets too deep for plants to grow along the edge, that's no longer the littoral. Now you're in the limnetic, and if it goes deep enough, you can get the profundal where there's no light. And then again, the benthic is from the shallowest part all the way to the deepest part. All the bottom is the benthic. Okay, freshwater wetlands. These are very important, especially here in Florida. Most of Florida is wetlands. So this is very, very important. So we have freshwater wetlands. We have our swamps. They have emergent trees. So they have trees in the water. So there's a picture down here of a cypress swamp. And we have those around here. Marshes usually have cattails and sedges. Those are kind of the taller little weedy plants around the edge. If you've never seen a cattail, Google it. It's quite a cute little plant. Bogs are acidic. They're usually moss and some spruce trees. And then a fen is very much like a bog, but is groundwater fed. The water's coming up from the aquifer below. So you should be familiar with those and read about those. Okay. I don't feel good all of a sudden. I need a break. Okay. Not that you guys need to know that. Moving on to saltwater. Saltwater marshes are also known as estuaries. We have a lot of this around estuaries around here. Of course, the Everglades is a major estuary. Nutrient-rich organic material, lots of organic material, very high productivity, filters out contaminants out of our water, helps settle out sediments. It's also a nursery zone or habitat for a lot of our fish and other marine critters, and very important to our fisheries so that we have that habitat for the little critters. Mangrove swamp, lots of these around here. Mangroves, 3 different types, black, red, and white mangrove. They are all very salt tolerant. Most true plants are not very salt tolerant. You have your seagrasses and then your mangroves, and that's about it. Most plants can't handle major salt like these guys can. Your mangroves are very important. Sorry, I keep yawning. Mangroves are very important along our coastlines. They protect from storm damage and erosion. If you look at the picture down here, you'll see. So a storm comes into here, and these roots and trees will kind of just buffer that, so you're not going to have as much damage inland. It is now illegal to remove mangroves. So if you buy property along the coast and there's mangroves between you and the water, you cannot remove them. It's against the law. So, because they're very important. In saltwater things, we have similar abiotic components to freshwater: temperature, pH, but now we have salinity, that's the amount of salt, still depth, turbidity, flow and currents, light intensity, nitrogen, phosphorus. So, okay, so now we're in the real ocean. Just a few things you need to know about the real ocean. Intertidal zone, that's the zone between high tide and low tide. If you've ever gone to the beach and your towel almost got wet, that was high tide coming in. Or if you go there sometimes and there's rocks exposed, and not other times, that was low tide. Critters that are stuck in the intertidal zone, especially it happens to be a rocky intertidal like here, this is tide pools, they get direct sunlight, so temperature goes up, salinity goes up because evaporation occurs and makes the salt water some more salty. When that tide's coming in and out, they may have to deal with heavy duty waves, and ultimately part of the time they're uncovered, they're not in the water, so they have to worry about desiccation, that's drying out. So that's why things like mussels and barnacles and stuff, they're in a shell and they can really close up tight so that they are not losing any water from their bodies. Okay, moving on. We're almost done. Yay. Because this has been a fiasco. Coral reefs. Picture down here of coral reefs. You know the Great Barrier Reef. It's huge. We have coral reefs around here down in the Keys and stuff. Shallow, warm water. Shallow because they need lots of light, warm because that's what those critters, the corals, prefer. Western side of the oceans because those warm equatorial currents are bringing that warm equatorial water over there. That's where you're going to find them. You are not going to find coral reefs in California. That's cold water. You're not going to find them there. They're extremely high in biodiversity, lots and lots and lots of different species. Unfortunately, right now they are dying. Due to pollution, due to disease, black band disease, global warming, all kinds of situations, they are dying. A lot of sediment pollution stuff coming out of our rivers and stuff is killing them too. And actually, there's some speculation that even sunscreens, fringy reefs are the reefs that are very close to shore, and sunscreen might be actually poisoning them. Okay, so corals are what make up the basis of a coral reef. They're small individual polyps, little individual organisms that live together in a colony, which is a coral head. They have a mutualistic relationship with a photosynthetic brown algae called zooxanthellae. Yep, my senior research project was on that, so I can tell you all about this. So they need clear water, very low turbidity clear water, so they have plenty of sunlight, so the zooxanthellae can do their job. They can do photosynthesis. They share the sugars they make with the coral. The coral shares nutrients and CO2 with the algae, so it's a mutualistic things. And that again is why they have to be in shallow depths, so that they can get enough sunlight. Okay, almost open. Open ocean. In the open ocean, excuse me, you need to know the zones. We have intertidal, in between high tide and low tide. The neritic, this is all the open water. No, neritic is the shelf, sorry. out here to where the shelf drops off, all this in the shallow, that's the neritic. Neritic has more life than any other part of the thing. That's where you're going to find your coral reefs and everything. This is the oceanic, the open ocean over the true ocean bottom. Neritic and oceanic together make the pelagic. So if you combine, neritic and oceanic together, those equal pelagic. Benthic is the bottom. And then vertically, there's actually a lot of designations, but you just need to know there's the photic zone, that's the lit zone, and then the aphotic zone. A in front of a word you know means no or not. So that's the non-lit zone. So under here, I have a little diagram I want to do. So high tide, low tide, that's intertidal. Okay, out here to the shelf, okay, this would be your neritic. This all is oceanic. Okay, this neritic and oceanic together gives me my pelagic. And then as we go down, you have a light line. This would be your photic, would be here, and then your aphotic would be the dark part. Okay, so you have photic. And then this is aphotic, no light. A in front of a word you know means no or not. So photic means light zone, then aphotic means no light zone. Okay. Open ocean, a few things you need to know. Neritic zone has very high productivity, lots of varied habitats, coral reefs, coastal areas, that kind of thing. Oceanic zone actually has relatively low productivity because only the top part of it's enough light, and that's the open ocean. Okay, so that finishes off our biomes. If you have any questions in class, please ask. The last little story in this chapter talks about coffee and shade coffee. And shade coffee is a really important thing. It talks about sustainability of our behavior and what we're doing. The fact is, the way we grow coffee out in the sunlit is not exactly all that great for the coffee or for the surrounding forest. So a few years back, they moved to shade-grown coffee, meaning that we could leave the trees, or we could leave trees that were growing papaya or something, and we could grow the coffee amongst them. Coffee are shade plants. They don't like direct sun. So this is better for the coffee plant. It actually ends up that you use less pesticides, less fertilizers, there's less erosion of the soil, there's less water use, there's less pollution associated with shade coffee. The problem is that you get less of a yield. The coffee plant does not produce as many coffee beans per coffee plant, yet your coffee plant actually lasts more years. In sun-grown coffee, you have to change out your coffee plants about every 5 years or something. And coffee plants grown in shade actually last more like 8 years before you have to swap them out. A lower yield means a higher price to consumers, which of course we don't always get, why we need to pay more, so we not do that. But a lot of organizations are actually undercutting some of the cost and helping to support shade-grown coffee for the coffee growers. Ultimately, if you leave the forest intact and grow coffee in the shade, there ends up being higher biodiversity amongst the things. There's been many studies about the birds in the rainforest and how if you grow shade-grown coffee, there's a lot more bird species in the area, which is very important. Okay. We're done with chapter 4, thank goodness. And I'm not starting chapter 5 until tomorrow. So I will talk to you later. Have a nice evening.